Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Austin Smedley, your host of Beyond the Well podcast. I'm real excited to be back. It's been far too long. Got a really interesting episode to get back right into the swing of things with Saint Saturday. Before I go ahead and pronounce your name, because I've had a history of mispronouncing names. I don't know if maybe it's an Operation Werewolf thing or something. But if you can go ahead and introduce yourself and give me an idea how to pronounce your name so I don't mess it up or screw it up too badly.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Nico Murcialo, and most people just in the online space just call me Saint Saturday. It's kind of started as an Instagram handle, and then it's just gone from there. So either or is fine.
Wonderful. So just so everybody can get an idea of the work that you do, how we came across each other on Instagram, social media. What exactly do you do? Like, what do people know you for?
Yeah, most people, I think, based on the Instagram space and on online space right now, probably know me best for my artwork. So I'm a contemporary artist. I work in mostly painting, sculpture, and multimedia. Outside of that, I also am heavily involved in a number of different business enterprises, all of which involve brand design and brand development, marketing, and the creative space, and all of which really flow from the same place as artwork. I've definitely been more public about my artwork than I have about the other stuff, just as a social media presence. But all of the work I do generally flows from the idea of taking ideas and making them into work or business.
Definitely. That seems to be, especially with like Procano Initiative, with Paul, who is on here as well, Pat, all these guys that have been involved with this movement, and brand marketing is definitely a big one. I'm definitely learning the ropes myself, being a young man who could not possibly be more clueless when it comes to these things, but they definitely do flow from the same place. Like when we first began messaging each other, that's one of the things that you mentioned that stuck out to me was how your work, being a painter, a sculptor, all these other things that I am absolutely clueless about in myself when it comes to just talking and discussing philosophy and religious beliefs and all these sorts of things. You mentioned that they fall under the same banner, like they sort of exist in the same plane. Would you care to dive into that a little bit further?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way that I've kind of come over the last decade or so of doing, kind of explain my philosophy about the creative process and where all of these different elements that sometimes at first seem kind of like disparate pieces come from the same place by which we become good at them. The essential principles behind becoming good at painting or physical plane, like say if you're in the martial arts or weightlifting or whatever you're into, all the way through building a business and even spiritual practice, the process of becoming good at these things or mastering them or even exploring them on any level is all the same. So when I've been a painter my whole life, I've been an artist my whole life. It's always been something that I've done as a way to explore ideas that I wasn't able to put into words. And what I found is that as I got older and I spent a lot of time in the business space, in leadership in the tech sector, and eventually abandoned that to pursue brand creative elements of uncovering how to build a brand and how to build layers of meaning behind it, which I know is something you mentioned Paul and Procano Initiative talking about. And it's been interesting to see those parallels. So what that led me to realize is that all of these things are just different manifestations of the same. I tend to think of it as a divine principle, an internal principle, and all these things are like rays that radiate out from that same internal principle, which is mankind's desire to create and our will to bring forth things that don't exist and make them real.
Absolutely, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, when it comes to guys like the Procano Initiative and all the work that they do, Paul, I know, certainly has spoken about the principles between like physical prowess, like lifting weights or competing in MMA or writing or being a philosopher of some kind. A lot of those same principles, they're all the same. Like to be a successful artist, you need the same thing in order to be a successful in the business world as well. To dive a little bit deeper into that, what do you believe those principles are exactly? What makes you a successful painter and a successful businessman and what have you?
I think there's mundane principles and there's more esoteric ones, and I guess probably to start with the mundane ones would just be things that are very, very simple and not particularly sexy. The ability to suck at something for a long time before you're good at it. It's highly, highly, highly underrated. I think in an Insta age where everybody wants to be, not only to be good at everything right away, they want credit for everything right away. They want to be praised for everything right away. And really what I've noticed to be, to become good at, say, artwork, it requires that you be willing to suck at painting for a very long time, and just to be able to hammer away at that and do so for years and years and years and years. Really getting no praise from anybody but your close friends and family. They're telling you you're improving before you can actually see results and before you can actually develop the skill that matches what you have in your head or your heart to create. So one of the things I've noticed in this capacity is the frustration that somebody who's starting off as an artist or just beginning to explore a creative medium, whatever it may be, whether it's music or art or, photography or whatever else, right? They're all, creativity is creativity. They get to a place where the initial rush of it and the initial excitement of picking up something that's new and novel wears off and is kind of replaced by this relentless grind. And the ability to push through that grind and keep going, even though you're not good and you're not good yet, is kind of that's the first, and I'd say most mundane and probably most difficult piece of the puzzle to crack. And the way that I got past that was basically just looking at my work and saying, okay, well, in the early years, I'm very, very well aware that my work isn't good. I look at, other artists out in the world and, even in the pre-social media era when I was getting started, you still compare yourself to other artists that are good and you know that your work isn't that yet. But what that does indicate is that you have good taste because you're self-conscious enough to be aware that your work isn't good yet. And the ability to kind of set that aside and say, okay, I'm just going to put my head down and keep working, I think definitely on a mundane level, that's probably the first imperative, right? And that, like I said, that's the same whether you're growing a brand or a business or you're, trying to make progress in the gym, you're grinding away, seeing no results, and you just have to buckle down and stick with it.
Comparison can be the death of progress if you don't have the right mindset for it. I've definitely...
Oh, yeah.
I've been experiencing. It's funny that you kind of mentioned that because, like, even with this project that I've done and me being substantially younger than the people around me and the people I'm speaking to, just getting in all this knowledge. And for someone who's completely new to building a brand or whatever, someone like myself, for example, who knows, like that first part you mentioned was gold. You have to be prepared to suck at something for a very long time before you're good at it in any capacity. And for me, it's a technical side of things. When it comes...
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not only do you have to be prepared to suck at something, though. I think it's actually, that's kind of a, well-trod platitude, like perseverance and discipline. Guys like Jocko Willink talk about that a lot, obviously. And there's a lot of thought leadership on that. But I think the other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is your mindset towards, not being good at something yet, right? There's two mindsets. And it's all about orientation in my experience. You have the orientation of comparing yourself to those who are better at what you do than you are. And you look at that as being a mindset of not trying to mimic them or copy them, but trying to achieve what they have in spirit. And you use that as I guess, inspiration to draw yourself closer to that ideal state. Or you look at it and you turn into one of these people on Instagram that just is, constantly flipping through their feed and looking at every other artist or, whatever it is you do, looking at every other person in that category and comparing yourself negatively to it and saying, oh, this guy's been doing this thing for 10 years and I'll never be that good, right? It's like, well, at some point he started off where you were too, and he was shit as well. And it's just a matter of how do you orientate yourself towards not being good, right? Towards a state of being a student. Obviously it's easy to say. It's easier to say when you've already kind of passed that curve to some extent and you've already, developed a particular skill set to become good at something. But it's so important to have that orientation, I think. And that's something that is kind of like one of the aspects of modernity that I don't like is increasingly seem unwilling to not be good at things for a period of time to earn that skill.
Yeah, just the same way if you're in a weightlifting competition or in an MMA fight or an exhibition of some kind, you have to earn the victory, whether by points or by submission or by knockout or what have you. You have to earn it. I think that's the big one there. Especially when it comes to like the social media age, when a lot of people, especially for younger folks like myself, when it comes to, we'll open up social media and we've got a million examples of what success, quote unquote, success looks like. And you have the hot people advertising and making millions of dollars just by being hot, by wearing this brand or that brand. Yeah, it can be extremely frustrating and demotivating to someone who perhaps doesn't fit that same mold, but is more motivated and has an idea, but you don't get to see the early stages. You know, you don't get to see when they sucked. All you get to see is, well, I suck. What am I going to do from here?
Yeah. The other thing too, I think, with the age of influencers that we live in, and being an individual who works and who the nature of my business outside of art, and arguably even in art, is essentially brand development and marketing. Being able to look at influencers has been absolutely fascinating. And I think from the outside perspective, what a lot of us see, and certainly what I saw when I first began to notice social media influencers, a lot of these people, you look at them and you think, what the fuck do you actually do? What do you actually do? You don't do anything. Like you nailed it, right? You're sitting there taking a picture with whatever brand you have, and that's essentially what you're being paid to do. But there is a sort of brilliance in that. There really is. There's I found that I kind of ran smack into my own cognitive bias when I first encountered that, and it kind of made me a little bit salty until I realized, these people are really just individuals who have their finger on the pulse of the zeitgeist right now. They understand what works and what doesn't, and they've got a commodity, which happens to be their good looks or their, whatever they have, and they're using that like a weapon, and they're using it to succeed, and they're using it as a way to leverage weak spots in reality to get what they want. And I as much as I can philosophize my way around why I don't like that and why I think it's not really contributing much, at the same time, if I was a model material kind of guy, would I use that too? Like, damn right, I probably would. Why not? Right? It's again, I think it depends. Like anything else, we're going to see the surface level of what those people are. And I know a bunch of people who are influencers, and, seeing what they post on Instagram versus who they are in real life oftentimes is, we only see the surface, right? We only see the tip of the iceberg there. And there's a much deeper plan for a lot of them going on. So it's a hard one for me too, because I'm not really into the whole vapid, just showcasing them an individual standing there looking cute or whatever. So.
Neither am I. I mean, again, like you kind of hit the nail on the head. If I had those same traits that would earn me that same living doing those same things, I mean, UFC fighter Paige Vanzant in the strawweight division, she's a female fighter. She's primarily known for being a hot chick, basically. And she did an interview recently, and she said, I make a lot more money just wearing things on Instagram than I do actually fighting. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that there too, because honestly, they really are doing the same exact thing as someone with a talent for speaking is doing. They're holding their finger on the pulse of the masses, and they're going ahead and they're making a living doing the same thing. Will they be remembered the same way as that writer, the one that made or wrote that book? Probably not, but they're doing the same thing. They're making the same living.
Absolutely, right. And it really depends on the individual and what their will is to do. I mean, does a person want to devote themselves to one particular endeavor, or being an influencer and not really producing anything with any kind of immortality to it? Or do you want to be known for, leaving behind you literature or art or a business empire or something that carries on and persists after your death, right? So I think, when we encounter that, we sort of encounter something that's really fundamental and essential to the human condition, right? Which is like I said, to kind of tie it back to what you were asking earlier about all manners of creativity flowing from the same wellspring. Really, I think, it depends, do you have that drive within you to call forth things which aren't and make them real? And that, to me, is where that would be the more, I guess we could call it the more esoteric level of what the overlapping creative activities is that, that will to create, and that for me, the way I tend to visualize that within myself is the image of the black sun, which, obviously, I imagine a bunch of listeners are going to be familiar with, right? But the way I visualize my creative center is like the center of the black sun, and all of the sigrunes or the arms or the radiating out are different forms of creative expression. That could be my work in the gym. It could be my work as a leader of my organization. It could be a anything, whatever it is, those are all just spokes radiating out from the center, and they're vehicles for that energy within to find manifestation in the real world.
That actually reminds me of a quote that I heard Nicholas Shreck say not too long ago in an interview that he did. Someone was asking him about the music that he created and where does it come from, and he answered with one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard him say. He said, "I am a vessel for the sound. I don't see myself as the creator. In fact, I am allowing the sound or the song to flow through me. I am simply here to be a vehicle for the sound's needs." And taking that esoteric, that perspective was incredible. I mean, we're beyond the well. We're all about the esoteric here. That's what we do. But when it comes to those things, I mean, that was an incredible perspective. And apply that to whatever work you're doing, for weightlifting or folding boxes or whatever. You are a vessel for the thing that you're doing rather than you doing that thing. And it can serve as a number of purposes, one of which being maybe to humble you a little bit, because we can definitely get up on our high horse sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I think that also, it has the joint effect, at least, that I've noticed in, hopefully in myself and in others. It not only keeps you humble because you kind of give credit for the source of that work to, whether that's your higher self or a god or God, like whatever you're that greatness to a higher source. And you're kind of humbling yourself into a place where you're basically you're basically the musical instrument, the wind passing through it, and the music's just coming. The sound is coming from somewhere else, right? You're just the same channeling it. And I think it also, if you begin to look at yourself as a vessel for connection to the divine or connection to the mythic, which to me is what all artwork should be. It should be a way to abandon the mundane and pursue the mythic. I think if you begin to look at yourself as almost like an acolyte or like a priest of this creative center, you're automatically going to begin orienting yourself towards things of value and away from the vapid and the mundane. You're going to be seeking things of greater value. I mean, do you want to channel great music or do you want to channel pop garbage, right? I mean, that's if you're just the vessel for that music, then what does that say about what you're channeling?
I think ultimately that makes the difference between a pop tune and an extremely elegant, beautiful piece of music that transcends time. Guys like Mozart and the classical composers, there's a reason why we remember them. There were other artists around that same period of time who, by those standards, were shit, but we don't remember their names, and that's for a reason.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely, yeah. And I think it's going to be interesting for the people of the future to see, like, who's the Mozart of today, right? Who are those people today? Who are the people in this age of democratized communication where literally all of us have a voice and all of us are effectively our own media syndicate? Who will the people of tomorrow remember? Who are they going to look back on and think, like, that guy was like the Jimi Hendrix of 2019, or the Mozart or the Wagner or whoever it was, right? Like that. Like, who's going to be those people tomorrow? It's I think about that often.
Well, so definitely, while we're on the subject of immortality, it seems like when it comes to, like, whether you're a writer, a singer, an actor, whoever, or a painter especially, artwork tends to transcend time, kind of like we're discussing now. So would you say that immortality, achieving this state of transcending time and being remembered hundreds or thousands of years in the future, is that a part of the endeavors that you're doing, whether that be brand marketing or being a painter?
Absolutely, yeah. I think everybody who creates artwork is on some level doing so with the intention of creating something that it persists after their death. There's a lot of philosophy that comes out of traditional Japanese aesthetics that looks at the transience of life as a thing of beauty, and it kind of elevates it to its own aesthetic. And I think that for me, that's been influential in the sense that when I look at the artwork I create, it's not so much that it's not so much an ego play where I want to create things that somebody's going to remember my specific name 2,000 years from now. Because when we look at the statues of ancient Greece or Rome or the Parthenon or whoever it is, like, we don't know the names of those artists necessarily that created all of those things. Their names oftentimes have been lost to time. And I'm sure mine will be too, as most of ours will be. But the act of pouring my passion and my soul into works of art that will hopefully be dragged out of the sea 2,000 years from now and wondered at by the people of a distant future. There's something about that that allows to captivate the substance within me and the substance that I'm trying to channel and make it immortal. And that definitely is always my objective. Everything is really just a vehicle to make that happen. And there's cultural reasons for that too. I look at the world right now, particularly Western civilization. I would maybe straying into the world of metapolitics here a little bit, but I look at Western civilization right now, of which I am a scion, and I see so much going wrong, and I see so much orientation away from greatness and kind of down into this, self-deprecating state of being that so many of our nations have sort of sunk into. And you mentioned Paul Wagner at the beginning of this this conversation, and there's something I saw that he either read or said that kind of really stuck with me. He said, it's you don't want to spend your time trying to tear down what you hate. Spend your time trying to build what you create, which is obviously with a lot of his work. That's what he's been doing. And it's when I heard that, it kind of hit me as an incredibly profound way of living. It's so simple and it's so powerful. And for me, the artwork, the objective of it is always to inspire the people of tomorrow who are, part of my culture and my civilization, so that hopefully, if I'm good enough and if what I produce is valuable enough, be it in art or in business or in any other endeavor, that people tomorrow will feel the inspiration and feel the energy from that the same way that I looked on my influences and have carried that culture forward. So I guess when we say immortality, it's less about an immortality of myself as it is an immortality of an idea or a spirit.
You mentioned if we talk about Asian influences, like look at texts like the Bhagavad Gita, like Sri Krishna, figures like that.
Oh, yeah.
One of their primary, their messages is kind of relates to what Nicholas Shreck said with the whole sound thing. He said, action is better than inaction. Doing things, but performing your action with detachment from the world around you, because only the fool is the one who gets tied up in the results of his actions rather than the action itself, just doing that thing. That seems to be where immortality is really achieved, is not exactly, not doing something for the sake of, I want to get paid for it, I want to do this. Like you mentioned the sculptures in Greek and in Rome and all these other places. The sculptures speak for themselves. The action was far more important than the result or the reward, because that reward was lost to time, but the action, the sculpture, is still there, standing 3,000 years later.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing with when I look at the stories that are handed down to us, be they from Vedic sources or European sources or, Chinese or whatever culture it is, doesn't really matter. The fact that we still have stories that are told and understood and iconized in our modern day world that are, 4,000, 3,000, 6,000 years old is incredible. What is it about those stories that is so absolutely fundamentally true in its principle that 6,000 years later or 3,000 years later, we still know the names of these heroes and these gods and these principles and ideas, and the overall scope and arc of the story is still with us. And that, to me, is what immortality really is about. It's less about the individual, for sure.
And it also seems as if, like you mentioned, artists of old and things of that sort, like being an influencer for the future, like for generations of the future. And you mentioned the metapolitic kind of connection there too. In modern times, and this has been an issue for human civilization as long as we've been around, but there's been an influx of people defining themselves by what they hate rather than investing themselves in what they're for. Like all kinds of groups out there that are specifically existent because they are against something. That doesn't seem to get you anywhere other than being this guy. Like, if you ask someone, who are you, and they say, I'm not this, you haven't answered the question.
Absolutely. They always ring hollow to me, groups like that define themselves by whatever it is they hate. Doesn't matter what it is. I mean, and again, I'm not out to judge whether somebody should or shouldn't hate something. I don't generally care, but to me, it just seems wasteful. It seems like a waste of time to spend your time giving that much power, like you're almost conferring supernatural power to the thing you hate by, being so wrapped up in it, as opposed to redirecting that energy and using it to create what you love instead. To me, like that, the whole principle behind that shifting mindset is really alchemy, right? That's the fundamental principle behind most of my work, and a lot of the work that I follow and admire in others is the ability to take one thing and turn it into something else, right? Take an idea, turn it into reality. Take fear and turn it into fire. Take pain and turn it into art. Whatever it is, right? There's a way to create something positive with it instead of just nurturing this slow, bitter hatred that produces nothing.
Absolutely. When it comes to producing nothing, if you only have what you are against to define yourself, then you really aren't worth much, and that seems to be a massive issue in regards to at least contemporary existence. So I know you touched on a lot of artists, including myself, whenever just it comes from me writing something, a piece of poetry, or doing this, when I set out to do something, and one of the, to reference back to the Bhagavad Gita, like principles of that nature, practicing detachment from your results. What about you as an artist, when you dig down deep into that place that really inspires you and influences you to get your work done? What kind of forces motivate you to do those things? Is it immortality? Is that the most important part of it? Or is it just a personal, is it a ritual to you? Like what inspires you day to day to get up and to be an owner of a business, or to be a painter, own a studio?
I think it's a couple of different things, to be honest, that all work in union. On a high level, the striving and the belief that I have a particular mindset and a particular kind of skill set that allows me to create things that further culture and kind of seek that immortality. So there's definitely that, but I find sometimes that's almost too esoteric. It's almost too high level. And as much as I like melodrama and mythology, I find sometimes what I need is just something a little more grounded and a little more visceral and a little more immediate than this idea of 2,000 years from now people are going to look at my artwork and it's going to change them in some way. And when it comes to the more, I guess, ground level or internal or personal reason, really, it's a tough one for me to explain. I tend to just look at the creation of art in the same way that a lion probably looks at why it kills or why it hunts. In many ways, it's just plated in what I do. And there's been times when that need to express and that need to feel a connection and that need to put out something in the world and find a way to take the emotion or the ideas or the energy that I feel when I interact with myself and with the world. There's been times in the past where I've not honored that internal drive and that internal need to create things. And when that's happened, that's led me to addiction in years gone by. It's led to all kinds of problems. And for me, the motivation and the discipline to create is as much an act of just honoring the need to take what I experience and to turn it into something else and communicate it and use it to build. So it isn't necessarily always a motivational thing. Like, motivation isn't a particularly relevant experience for me. It's just kind of what I do, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of that can kind of seem like a wishy-washy answer, but I don't really have it's less thought and more just kind of visceral action for me sometimes.
So, in other words, kind of how you've mentioned the lion. So when a lion is on the hunt and it sees its prey, the lion is going to kill and eat the prey because he is, in fact, a hunter. The same way you are an artist because it's who you are, not really what you do.
Absolutely, and that's I don't look at it like a job. I don't look at it like an active, conscious choice in the sense that I sat down and planned out what I was going to be when I grow up and settled on an artist. It kind of just happened. And it happened as a way, for a number of different reasons. Art for me has been very therapeutic. It was a way to turn pain into something creative and to reconstitute a lot of negative emotions and negative experiences into something positive and productive. I would say it's partially meditative as well. It's definitely ritualistic. And it's definitely taught me a lot of the ability to like detach from from the outcomes. Like you mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, which is fantastic, and I love the ideas that book postulates that trying to gain ownership of the outcome of your work will always anchor you to negative outcomes in the long run. So for me, the act of spending whatever it is, 20, 30, 40, 100 hours on a painting, and then having it leave me and go out into the world to who knows where, right? It could be anybody. I don't know a lot of people that buy my work, obviously, so it could end up anywhere. When I first started doing that, and when I first got to a place where I was selling artwork, I kind of hit this wall where you're excited because now you're getting paid to do something you love, but at the same time, I felt this weird sort of sense of selfishness, like, oh, that's my work, and I want to sell it, but I also want to hang on to it. And the ability to just let go and to realize that I'm creating for reasons for myself as well, but I'm also doing this for other people. Like I don't hang my artwork on my own wall. It's meant to go out there in the world and do things for other people. That's definitely been a big part of it too, is just using it as that cathartic process of ritual of creation, and then I guess you could almost call it destruction when it leaves me and goes out into the world, and that piece is gone forever. It sort of reminds me, there's a video that I watched on YouTube, and it may have been on Baraka or Samsara, but it was these Tibetan monks building this elaborate mandala out of sand, and they spend God knows how long on this thing, and it's absolutely incredible. And when it was done, the one monk drags his hand across it and wipes it out. And then they take all the sand and they pour it into a jar, and they put the jar on a shelf with a whole bunch of other jars of colored sand, which they've obviously done this process many times. And I saw that and I thought, how profound is that? I mean, it's the same sand, the work got done. There was just so much profundity there, so many layers of meaning behind that gesture. So it's something I've tried to emulate in my own work.
I mean, Tibetan monks, if you want to talk about enlightenment and ways of doing things that make absolutely no sense to us, like to us Westerners in a lot of ways, because we like to be, tell me how good my work is. Tell me how good my work is. Oh, that review is negative. Like we lose sleep over those things. And then you have people across the world who will spend so much time into this magnificent work of art just to wipe their hand across it. And it's
incredible, isn't it?
It's mind-blowing in a lot of ways. I would love to watch this myself because it sounds like something I get a lot out of, and so would everybody else. But kind of one of the things that I wanted to touch upon there, you mentioned that when it comes to you being an artist, it's sort of like a ritual, it's a meditation. And referring back to the Bhagavad Gita, when it comes to ascending beyond your ego, ascending beyond your physical, your sensory body, and identifying with your Atman, the Brahman, the Godhead, being higher than the body that we inhabit now. Is art the way that the action that you use to associate yourself with that higher self? Is that the action that you use to ascend beyond the ego, ascend beyond the senses?
I think so. Yeah. The whole concept for art, in my opinion, is to encapsulate the spirit of an idea. At least it is for me. And the creation process, from the time I conceive of an idea for a painting to the time it's complete, the real art for me takes place during that process. And it's really about trying to get outside of myself and find a way to merge my creative style with something that goes beyond it. There's definitely ritualistic elements to there. I also, the mediums I use and the style of my work is also all intentionally done with esoteric purposes and with I guess occult purposes that are sort of played in and all that. So the choice to use all of the base layers, for example, that I use are ashes and charcoal that come from previous paintings that I've done that I've burned. So there's a sacrificial element there, which I guess kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with the mandala. Is I'll paint, whether it's just the sketches for the piece that I'm working on, or whether it was an entire full-size painting, that I will burn and then collect those ashes and use those to kind of do the underpainting and the mock-up of the next painting along. So there's the symbolism there, I think, is pretty obvious, right? I mean, ashes are carbon. It's like a foundational building block. There's the reference to the beginning stage of the alchemical process called nigredo, which is blackening, which is also where my namesake comes from. Saturday being Saturn, or the planet Saturn, which is often associated with the destructive elements. And then even the choice of merging abstract with realism to kind of touch on the form and the spirit of the thing. Choosing to use acrylic with oil. There's like the acrylic tends to be newer and more vibrant. It's a more modern medium. And oil is old school, right? That's the product of the old masters, and gives you a more fleshy tone. So everything has been about fusing the mundane with the mythic, and always orienting towards a higher level of being, for sure.
It's excellent just how all these that burning of the old and using the ashes of the old to create something anew. I mean, that's the essence of alchemy, kind of like you mentioned earlier, is turning one thing to another.
So important.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have never even thought. Of course, I myself am not a painter. It's definitely something I want to pick up and try and get better at, for sure. But just that process being what it is, it kind of reminds me almost of planting, like gardening, using old soil that is using old soil that has hosted a previous civilization of plants, and using that and recycling it to make something new.
Well, it's the Ouroboros, right? It's the kind of the circle without beginning and end, right? Everything that divinity creates, it also destroys and consumes, and then uses to create something else. So I guess from that perspective, no one ever really dies. We're all reconstituted back into the state of being, and then recalibrated into something else. That it really, the process that I try to match with my artwork is exactly that, writ small. And for me, it's a way to sort of access that, and hopefully the process of doing so transfers something of that to the people that consume the work, or who buy it or whatever, right? But it really, for me, that was also a way of reconciling my own past. I had about, I guess we're going back about 12 years now. I was in a very, very different place than I am today with addiction to opiates and heroin. My life had been essentially completely destroyed, and the process over the last 12 years of having rebuilt that and reconstituted it, and basically having to reconcile a lot of really terrible things from the past with where I was going, that to me was where art really got its start, and that's where I really began to learn about the ideas of the fact that you can take something that's been negative and painful and destructive and call it metaphorically burn to ashes, and you can use that to I love the gardening method you just mentioned. Actually, that's excellent. That's exactly the mindset, right? You can take that to grow something new. So,
well, life and death is cyclical.
What is it? Like all greatness has its roots in sorrow.
Yeah, I was immediately hit with a Marcus Aurelius statement that he made in Meditations. It's that me and a friend of mine actually had a conversation about recently. It's life and death are just processes of nature, and anybody who's afraid of a process of nature is a child. That's the essence of it. And I think just kind of round this back out, put a stamp on it. I wanted to get your perspective on, as we mentioned earlier, when it comes to building a brand of any kind or being an artist of any kind. Demotivation and things like that, they tend to hit. We get hit with processes maybe while we're in the process of doing something, of creating something. We get hit with, whether it be a financial situation or we lose sight of what we're doing. We have to draw ourselves back to our roots, why we started doing this thing in the first place. If you had to give any sort of advice to someone who might be in a rut, stuck with what they're doing, what would that be? How do you drag yourself out of that hole and get yourself motivated again?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been so much in recent years, I think, written about that. And, obviously we live in an age right now where there's so much complexity, and there's so much opportunity for all of us to compare ourselves to everyone else and anything else at any given time. And, certainly we all, as be it as artists or in life in general, fall into those ruts when we kind of feel like we dry up and get stagnant. The best advice I could give, I think, is just, and it's so simple that it's almost boring to hear, is just make sure that whatever it is you're doing, no matter what it is, whether it's a business, whether it's a relationship or a marriage or whatever, or creating art, always understand what your reason for being there is. Do you absolutely have a clear reason, and is there consonance between what that reason is and what you're doing? And if there is, then draw yourself back to that question of why. Like, why am I creating art? Why do I care about this? Why do I care? Why did I choose this business in particular? And it doesn't always have to be some grand idea. Some of the strongest reasons I've ever heard is because I don't want my daughter to grow up poor. I mean, that's a hell of a powerful reason, right? I mean, if that doesn't motivate a man to get off his ass and build a brand and do his work, then nothing will, right? So I think in kind of when the creative juices are flowing, and when we'll call it what it is, when money's flowing, when things are working, when things are successful, when we feel like that divine energy is just flowing through us and everything is happening, almost in a magical sort of way, it's easy to feel motivated. It's easy to feel that sense of passion, and it's easy to get up and talk about how great life is. But when that wellspring begins to dry up and when the water stops flowing, just remember, like, everything has a dry season, right? There's always going to be droughts. There's always going to be times when the waters aren't flowing. And at that point that's when you kind of have to just honor that phase, right? Like, don't be afraid of not feeling okay all the time. I mean, one of the things that's been so damaging about all of this personal development bullshit and self-help nonsense that I see is that it gives you the idea that unless you're this absolute fucking beast that's switched on and producing crazy artwork and, making $1 million businesses happen overnight, unless you're doing that and unless you're always positive and always, beaming with energy, that something must be wrong. It's like, no, like there's night and day, there's light and dark, there's, a summer, if you're in that summer phase, so to speak, where things are flourishing and creativity's flowing, money's flowing, love is flowing, whatever it is you're looking for, that's good, but there's going to be a winter. Like, you're going to pay for that at some point. There's going to be a time when you need to just honor that cycle. So to me, that would be the best advice I could give, is that kind of dual, I guess we'll call it two pieces of advice. First of all, understand why the fuck you're doing this in the first place and have a very good reason. It doesn't need to be a colossal poetic reason, but just have a reason. Understand what it is that you're trying to do and why you're doing it, and then honor the cycles and don't be afraid of the negative cycles. I mean, it's, winter is just a time to maybe step back from your studio for a month and go be with family and friends and get away from the artwork that's frustrating you and come back to it with fresh eyes. And I found that there's a magic in just honoring those cycles.
Remember the garden. Its soil isn't always prosperous.
Always.
That was fantastic. I appreciate that. Was excellent. I wouldn't have worded it better myself. So I just want to go ahead and extend thank you so much for coming on as we round out this episode. This was one of my favorite talks. Definitely a lot of golden stuff here. A great way to get back into the swing of things. I just again want to thank you for coming on. Where can our listeners find you on social media, wherever else?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm at St. Saturday with an underscore at the end on Instagram, on Facebook as well. That's probably the easiest way to find me. All
right, and we'll go ahead and I'll drop all the plugs and stuff like that on our website.
Awesome, man.
The BeyondTheWellPodcast.com. The website has been purchased. It's under construction, ready to get that going. We can be found at Beyond the Well Podcast on Instagram. Facebook's getting ready for that too. Again, thank you so much, Nico, for coming on here. Nico Murciello, is that how you say it?
That's right.
Okay, cool. I didn't butcher it. Awesome.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let's do it again sometime. Thank you so much.
You got it, man. Take care.